On this episode of China Unscripted, how the Ohio train wreck is being used for Chinese propaganda, China declares victory against COVID again, and the Chinese spy balloon thing is even weirder than we thought. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganeshta.
I just want to say, last night we for the first time got to meet Anderson, the video editor for this podcast, as well as China Unscripted. Oh, no, this is China Unscripted.
We're
also
doing really
China
well.
Uncensored. Yeah, so like he was in Taiwan.
Also, this is not the first time that we've met him.
It's not the first time we've met Anderson.
Well,
Okay. So
anyways, he's visiting from Taiwan, so we had the great idea to like, hey, take him to like this really American place where everything is deep fried, and you have the option of smothering everything in like cheese and gravy
and bacon.
So we all feel awful. Anderson, you're editing this. I hope this reminds you of the trauma. I apologize. So yeah, we're really on fire today.
Was that a condemnation?
Anyway, so here we are in America.
And I think let's start off with some of the big news that's actually kind of old news, but is now new news because people are actually paying attention to it. The train derailment in Ohio that spread a bunch of toxic chemicals around. Actually, it was more like the burning of the toxic chemicals that really helped spread more toxic fumes around. Anyways, this has been a propaganda boom for the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes, that's why we're talking about it on China Unscripted.
Yeah, because, I mean, you know how great the reporting is from Chinese state-run media. Well, they have been on the scene in Ohio covering the news that the American government is trying to keep covered up.
Yeah, it's basically, there was at several different Ministry of Foreign Affairs briefings over the last week, they've just repeatedly pointed to the Ohio train derailment. Plus, there was a U.S. investigative journalist who claimed that the U.S. had something to do with the Nord Stream explosions that happened last year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, basically those two incidents, and they were basically like the U.S. is hyping up the spy balloon incident, which is not a spy balloon. It was a weather balloon.
And civilian.
Yes, and they're doing it because they're trying to cover up from all of these disasters that the American government was involved in and is trying to cover up.
This is why Global Times is my favorite state-run media.
Yeah, I think this is like the transitive principle of the CCP propaganda, which is like anytime they do something, their reflex is to accuse other people of doing the thing.
Of doing bad things, yeah.
Well, so it's like if they're trying to cover up the spy balloon incident, they're like, oh, well, the U.S. is the one trying to cover up the spy balloon incident.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, first they tried the U.S. sent 10 spy balloons into China in 2022. We're only talking about this now suddenly for no particular reason, and we have no evidence to back it up. So that didn't really work very well. But now this Ohio thing has been a pretty big boon because it is objectively like,
it's a bad story.
Bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
But they're basically hyping it up on Chinese social media, too, with people calling it Ohio Chernobyl.
Ah.
Yeah, being like, oh, this is as bad as Chernobyl. And there's a lot of...
Wait, so they want to compare this to a well-known Communist Party cover-up?
Well, I mean, it wasn't a Chinese Communist Party cover-up.
I know, but the whole... Like my whole perspective on Chernobyl, and I think this is a fairly common perspective, is that the problem with Chernobyl was less the accident and more that the way communism works is it basically forced like increasing layers of cover-ups and officials avoiding responsibility. And that's why it went from what could have been a relatively contained nuclear meltdown to a widespread disastrous one where they had to basically shut off and evacuate an entire city for decades.
Do you think that the Chinese understanding of Chernobyl is that it was actually the fault of communism? Because I do not think that is what the Chinese understanding of Chernobyl is.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I think it is a good tactic because you're comparing it, what happened in Ohio, to a well-known catastrophe that the government kind of covered up and messed up. So I think people see more the connection between like the U.S. covering up the Ohio thing.
You're right. This is no place for nuance.
And so basically on Chinese social media, too, there's a bunch of popular like nationalist to like netizen people who are spreading photos claiming that like this giant dark cloud, this video with this giant dark cloud is, from the Ohio train derailment, like it's the toxic fumes. But it turns out that it's actually a video from Portland of, I don't know what, I guess actual clouds. Like it's...
I want to, like, these are pretty intense, which we will have on screen, I'm sure. Thank you, Anderson. But those are some pretty gnarly clouds.
Yeah, but,
But they have nothing to do with the incident.
Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with the train wreck in Ohio.
Unless...
that, like, in Portland, there was these clouds that happened before the train wreck.
No, that's the aliens.
Okay.
And, like, all, like, the spy balloons and the Ohio thing is a cover-up for the aliens.
Yeah, and then, like, some of the same type of...
You just let that swish off of you like water.
I mean, in one ear, out the other, Chris. Okay, do you want to talk more about the aliens?
No, I said my piece.
Okay. Well, also, they're basically trying to portray it like the U.S. media is covering it up, too. They're not really reporting about it, which is objectively not true at this point. There's been a lot of media coverage now.
Yeah. Though a lot of it did come after a lot of social media posts. But another explanation of that could be like the Ohio residents went back, saw stuff posted to the internet. People started talking about it in the media. It's like, oh, hey, this could make us money if we talk about it. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, the spy balloon is a big news.
Yeah, I don't think it's that really the media were in this case involved in a huge cover up on behalf of the EPA or something,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just that they're the owner of the train like might want to cover it up, and there's obviously some level of government incompetence going on, as is typical in any country, but the media at least weren't being censored.
I mean, it is just one of those things where it's like it was a bad situation, and it gives the Communist Party fuel for their propaganda stuff, and then backed by the nationalists online who'll post just any old thing.
And plus, then you basically will amp it up, right? Because the Chinese censors can choose what to show, what to delete, and then it's a feedback loop where then you have like a Global Times article that's talking about everybody on Chinese social media talking about this Ohio Chernobyl incident. So it's like it's a circle basically.
Yeah, and it also like it kind of manipulates like a lot of like conservative commentators in the U.S. who will be like, look, even China is laughing at us, pointing out our problems. Like this happens a lot when there's like a video of like, Chinese students like in classrooms like dismantling guns. There was a video about that kind of came out this week. Yeah, like there's some Chinese classroom where like young kids are like, they're all taking apart handguns.
Because... it's
communism. I don't know.
There's like a contextless video of this.
Yeah.
And what were people saying about it?
Oh, like look, China's preparing for war, whereas the U.S. is all playing Harry Potter or something. I don't know.
Okay, it's kind of like when there was a period of time when like there were certain conservative media personalities that were really into like the Russian military videos.
Oh,
because like they were like very
Look
like
at how
macho.
tough and they are.
Yeah.
And we are not doing that.
Yeah. So I mean, this kind of shows how like everything is about domestic politics in any country you go to, right?
Yeah.
So like the CCP doing this whole thing about the Ohio train derailment, it's really about domestic politics. It's not really about like they're using condemning the US in order to bolster their own rule in China, right?
Yeah, everything's about oneself.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
We're all very self-involved people and countries. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day about how U.S. presidential elections, it's always about domestic issues, but really the most power that a U.S. president has is on foreign policy.
Yeah.
But like people don't really care about that in terms of like what they're going to vote for.
Yeah. And it's also strange because like really, again, for like domestic stuff, Congress is way more influential. Like that's where the stuff happens. And yeah, nobody
theoretically.
Really, yeah, theoretically. But yeah, no one cares. There's something about the idea of like that one powerful leader that just captures people's imagination, even in a democracy where we're not supposed to treat leaders like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that secretly people on the inside yearn for maybe a supreme leader of sorts?
I think they do.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do. If only there was somebody who could fulfill all the mythological needs of the human psyche, to be all things to all men.
Mm-hmm.
If only there was someone like that.
Well, we could talk about the spy balloon.
Because we kind of were talking about the spy balloon, but now we can really talk about the spy balloon. Or shall I say spy balloons, ? Because we don't actually know what those other things are.
But
Aliens.
probably not Chinese spy balloons.
I'm not saying they were aliens.
Uh-huh.
But they were aliens.
You just need your hair to be a little spikier.
A little poofier.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the government said that they had not recovered any of the debris from those 3 additional balloons because of difficult terrain.
Yeah. Well, Biden came out on, I forget if this was Wednesday or Thursday, and said that they were pretty sure these were not Chinese spy balloons.
I mean,
Yeah,
as long as
and
Biden is pretty sure, I'm okay with that.
I mean, I think, and then there was
That's
that
solid.
crazy story that came out about maybe it was like a hobby. One of them was a hobby balloon. Did you see that?
Yeah, that there was like a local balloon club
In
It was
Illinois.
in Illinois, where one was shot down.
Well, they were like floating. They had a balloon and they knew it was kind of over Alaska. And then on the February 10th, and it would have been over the Yukon on the 11th, like when that unidentified object was shot out of Canadian airspace by a US F-22. But so I don't know, though, because like now it's a lot of speculation because Aviation Week published that story. And then, of course, all the media jumped on it because like what a wild story that would be if it was true, right? But no one's been able to get confirmation from anyone as of this recording. And also, there are a couple things that show that it may not have been like a $12 Mylar balloon, essentially, because before the U.S. officials had said that these objects were maybe the size of like a car.
Oh, okay.
So there's no proof that any of them were like a hobby balloon, but it sounds like a good story.
It does.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining a scenario like, a little kid and their dad flying a kite. Daddy, look how high my kite is. Tomahawk missile blows it up.
$400,000 missile. Yeah.
That was crazy.
The idea that each missile could cost $400,000, like to me, I'm like, well, that's a house, right?
In some parts of the country.
Yeah. Well,
in
and
San
like
Francisco, it's a third of a house.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, still.
And they
like,
missed the one time, the one over
just
Lake
oops.
Huron. They missed. You'd think a $400,000 missile, they'd like want to hit their slowly floating objects.
But it doesn't matter because they're spending our money, not their money.
Well, anyway, it does seem like the U.S. and maybe Canada started overreacting by just shooting down these random things.
Yeah, because it's weird, like, because it's clear like they were tracking that original Chinese spy balloon from like leaving Hainan Island all the way like across the continental U.S. And then like only after it became a big media thing where they're like, okay, we'll shoot it down. And now they're like, yeah, we'll shoot anything out of the sky. Pow, pow,
Yeah,
pow,
just
pow.
wait. You
making
know how every
people
year,
feel safe.
Yeah.
you know how NORAD, tracks Santa Claus every year. Well, you know what's going to happen this December.
Unidentified Santa objects.
But actually, it is interesting because you mentioned that like it did come out that from unidentified anonymous U.S. officials who talked to the Washington Post that they had been tracking this since Hainan, which there's a bunch of big military installations. Like Hainan is known as, it's a big island that's like off the coast of southern China, and it's known as China's Hawaii because it's like a very tropical, so it's like where people in China go to have like a tropical vacation. But also, like Hawaii, it has large military bases on it. And so people think that the U.S. officials think that it probably came from like a PLA Air Force. With
the intention of possibly spying on like Guam military bases.
Which they've done before.
Which they have done before. And it is possible this balloon did get blown off course and then they just decided to make the best of a bad situation and decided to spy on bases in the continental U.S.
It was still controllable.
Yeah.
So it might have gotten blown past where they had wanted to control it, but then they could still reestablish control.
I mean, they definitely hovered over the nuclear missile sites in Montana.
I think maybe it's just a coincidence, though.
Uh-huh.
Could be.
Yeah, but that was really interesting to hear that, basically I think the U.S. is trying to come out and say all these things without having to officially say them.
Mm-hmm.
So then, talking about how this is part of like a large aerial surveillance program that's been established for years by the CCP that involves like, balloons and satellites over other countries too. And there was also an interesting story, I think it was also in the Washington Post, about how China has used these types of large surveillance balloons domestically for years.
Oh, yeah.
Right, like over Xinjiang.
Yeah, to basically for quote unquote stability management, right? Which means quashing any protests or dissent against the government, etc.
It's a scary world when the government could just fly balloons over you to watch you. Like even if you think you're avoiding surveillance cameras, then there's the government balloon like overhead. It's like a weird, creepy dystopia.
But I mean, that's like nothing compared to like phones.
I was just thinking
or
that
WeChat.
like, you have the balloons, but then you have the surveillance cameras
just
and
like
you have
extra.
your phone. Like there were a bunch of the people they arrested for these protests that happened in November against like the COVID policy. They got because of the phone tracking. They could see that they were in the vicinity of the protests. So
yeah,
there is no escape.
So the lesson here, kids, is leave your phone at home when you go out to protest the Chinese government.
But people, also use their phones as documentation, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how all these videos of the protests get out, because everybody's filming it. Which means that everybody needs to start using GoPros.
That's right. Yeah.
Or maybe one of those very old cameras that you had to like crank.
Bring back Polaroids.
Yeah. Oh, there's also just camcorders.
Are there still camcorders?
Yeah. I mean, that's just any camera, like a prosumer camera, like the ones we use for our studio, that are designed to shoot video, and they're not designed to do anything else.
When is the last time you saw a like regular person carrying around a camcorder, though?
Am I a regular person?
Well, no, because you're a professional media person.
Yes, that's why he's not a regular person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in this case,
I don't know, Shally. I don't know when anyone has done that ever.
Well, so anyway, one of the things I found interesting about one of the objects that were blown up over the U.S. is one was octagonal. Like, what could a flying octagonal object be?
a weather balloon.
Octagonal, though?
I mean, I don't know if it's not a balloon in that case, but yeah, I don't know.
I'm not saying it was aliens, but
An alien species that has like an octagonal based. Like, did you ever see
Like octopods?
what was that movie? Signal? Was there a movie called Signal involving aliens?
Oh, with Renner, the Hawkeye guy.
Yes, he was in it too.
Yeah, I saw that movie. Was it Signals? That was a great movie where it's all about trying to communicate with the aliens.
Yeah, and well,
China thought they were like evil and were going to go on to like nuke.
there was some kind of precognition or something that she was like.
Yeah, when she learned to speak like the aliens, she was also thinking like the aliens, and they had different like ways of understanding
Arrival.
time.
Arrival.
That's
okay.
it. I think there was a movie called Signal.
That's 2016.
Yeah,
But,
really recommend that. Actually, that was a very good movie.
But because the aliens had no, like, wasn't it hexagonal? Like, there was some kind of, their writing system and stuff was based on their body morphology, which is like,
Right.
they were kind of like,
Octopuses.
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I mean,
squid kind of things.
Just like our numerical system is based on our body morphology, right? Our
Mm-hmm.
system of 10. Almost every culture has some
but
kind
not
of.
all.
Well, Aztecs had a system of 20,
Yeah.
which works if you're barefoot.
And I'm not saying they were aliens, but they were aliens.
Did the Mayans have a 12-base system?
Oh,
There's something like that.
I might actually be thinking of the Mayans, not Aztecs. But there
and
was
the number
one.
might be wrong.
Close. Live fact checking.
But yeah,
I'm just,
there are
I'm
some.
just looking it up. Yeah, it's the Mayans that had a base 20.
Oh, base 20. Okay.
But their base 20 started with zero, goes from 0 to 19, which is way more advanced than most cultures with like 1 through 10.
Yeah, like I
Starting
don't
with
think
zero is like-
zero really became a thing until like India in the second century, second or
Right.
third century AD. I was listening to an interesting thing about the Sumerians. A lot of people think they were aliens too. The ancient Sumerians.
Which ones
fall
were the
civilizations.
Sumerians?
Well, they were like a kind of a prosperous civilization in like ancient Mesopotamia, and they're weird because like they like suddenly kind of showed up out of nowhere with a language disconnected from everything else around it, and they established big civilizations and whatnot. So that's why some people think they were aliens.
I mean, I'm not saying it was the aliens.
Neither am I.
Didn't we talk to someone who had been to like these kind of UFO conferences where that alien guy was speaking, and they said that he really got a lot of women?
That does sound familiar.
Yes. I remember that conversation too.
Yeah.
So
and how
once
he
again,
always went around with his hair like that to be
yeah.
recognizable.
So it's like we were saying earlier, even though you're talking about the aliens, really it's all about domestic politics.
Okay, so
I mean, a lot of their like archaeological sites of their civilizations are like in Iraq and Syria, places that, you know, are difficult.
to do archaeology in currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so back to this octagonal sky thing.
Maybe it's from octopus aliens, is what we're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that was the very smart
that's
point.
probably what happened. In fact, I would say it's very unlikely that there's any other explanation.
Then I think we can put a period on this and move on to our next topic, right? Which I think we want to kind of talk about. Well, there's this ongoing thing the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do of like rewriting the history of COVID. We did an episode on that, and thankfully YouTube age restricted that because thank you, YouTube, so much. YouTube's going to get a new CEO, by the way. I'm kind of afraid of what
You
that
don't
will
think
mean.
things will get better?
Has anything that we've seen and experienced doing these shows made you think things get better?
Okay. Fair point.
So FYI, subscribing to us on like Patreon or Locals is a good way to stay in touch with us in case YouTube's new CEO is not a nice person. I don't know.
Well, speaking of, I think I know why that YouTube episode got age restricted, actually. It's because we talked about the CCP, persecuting people. And there was video of some police officers like arresting Falun Gong people on Tiananmen Square, which is an old video that we've used multiple times before.
It's like they're beating some guy up outside a van, right?
Yeah, and then like we've used it a ton of times before, but like only because people have started mass reporting us in the last couple of years. Have like any time we have anything that shows Chinese police brutality, that episode will get age restricted.
Yeah, even if it's just protests in China.
Yeah, or like once or twice it was like the Uyghurs, the blindfolded Uyghurs, or the Uyghurs, like that photo of Uyghurs being in prison garb and stuff like that. Yeah, so that'll be.
It's too disturbing to let people know what's actually happening in China. So
only the children, only people under 18, Matt. Meanwhile, if you've ever seen kids YouTube, there's like a lot of weird stuff on there.
Horror show, absolute horror show.
But I mean, it's not that we think that there are a lot of under 18-year-olds watching us, but if you're not signed into YouTube, you can't see it.
It also affects how YouTube will recommend videos. Like age-restricted videos don't get recommended.
Right.
So it like always kills the view. So this nice episode we put a bunch of work into showing how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to rewrite the history of COVID and cover it up. Thankfully, no one will see that now because of YouTube. Thanks.
It's almost like what we tried to expose has been covered up.
Yeah, maybe we should write our messages on balloons. That's not a terrible idea.
That is something that people have done, actually.
Like South Koreans sending balloons into
Propaganda
North Korea
from balloons.
with like pamphlets or even USB sticks.
Even when we were in Jingmen, I think there was like stuff like that where they would like, because the Chinese side would be like shelling Jingmen with like propaganda shells that had like propaganda on the inside. And then the other side, they were blasting like propaganda messages with the huge speakers, and they would send balloons across. Remember we did the thing where we were going to send a balloon across?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Jinmen spelled with a K. That's the island belonging to Taiwan. That's only a couple miles off the coast of mainland China. Jinmen.
Yeah, that episode we did back in 2018. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Beardless Chris.
Oh, that's
Remember
right.
Beardless Chris?
No, I blocked it out.
Are you trying to rewrite history?
Chris has always had a beard.
I've always had a beard from the day I was born. From the day I hatched out of an egg on top of a rainbow mountain. Destined to be supreme leader of these United States for life, which is an eternity.
So anyway,
Hey,
the Chinese Communist
speaking
Party.
of really stupid things to say,
Uh-oh.
China declared victory over COVID.
Over the exit wave, at least.
Yeah, over the exit wave.
Yeah. So,
There's a caveat there, which is that they can then define what exit wave means. They could define that later.
I would like any definition of exit wave. What is an exit wave?
well, I mean, I think what they mean is that like the big COVID wave that happened because they stopped zero COVID is now over and everything's fine.
Yeah. Well,
Let's get the economy going.
It
Yeah.
was not because they stopped zero COVID.
Oh yes, like it had started already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The wave was already coming in.
But some of this propaganda here is great because they're like, oh, how many more than 200 million people access medical services. Nearly 800,000 severe cases received proper treatment, and the country's COVID-19 fatality rate remained the world's lowest. China has created a miracle in human history.
Wow.
Yes.
And meanwhile, the evil U.S. empire is covering up, poisoning its own people. I mean, you just need to make the comparison, and it's obvious.
This is not going to age well when like people in 5 or 10 years discover that like actually like
Millions of people died?
millions, maybe tens of millions or more have died from COVID, and it was covered up for years.
Well, fortunately, it's going to take a long time for them to make those decisions, those discoveries, because guess what? China is not actually allowing the WHO to continue its investigations into the origin of COVID in China.
Who's shocked by this, right?
I wonder if there is somebody who is shocked by it.
Maybe the WHO?
Yeah, like, how could they do this to us? We did everything they did. We did everything they asked of us.
But yeah, I mean, I'm just still stunned that like they're blatant lying about the country's fatality rate remaining the world's lowest. Like,
yeah,
because they're lying about your fatality rate. That's why.
Well, it's also because there were specific instructions sent to doctors and hospitals and nurses about to not count deaths with COVID as deaths from COVID. So basically,
I mean, to put anything except COVID on the death certificate, if at all possible, basically.
Right. Yeah. So that affects the statistics.
Also, they only counted hospital deaths, so you had
All
to
the
have
rural
died
people.
in a hospital.
Wasn't there something about? Were you telling me about something about like a mass grave or something somebody found?
Oh no, it was the BBC had gone to a rural area to see how the COVID wave was doing there, and we've seen all those videos of like crematoriums being overwhelmed and like bodies piled up and people like waiting in line, but in rural areas, like there aren't that many crematoriums, and traditionally people were buried. And so there was just these photos that the BBC had taken of just these fields full of graves. It wasn't a mass grave. It was just like lots of graves in the fields, and from this COVID wave, because like they didn't have the capacity to like go take them somewhere to be burned. So they just like buried them in the fields. Yeah, and all those people are unaccounted for, essentially, right?
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, what I'm sure whatever is happening in the rural countryside is really scary, because that's where a lot of elderly people live who are more susceptible to COVID. Poor sanitation, poor medical treatments.
Yeah, not a lot of accessible treatment. Yeah, it's very...
Yeah, so, and there's like, what did we say, like 500 million people living in the countrysides?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. So yeah, it really could be, the death toll could be astronomical.
Well, I mean, it definitely is going to be astronomical compared to their admitted death
Their
toll.
admitted number.
Right. and probably also compared to the United States or most developed countries too.
Yeah.
I don't just mean in terms of raw numbers, but it could be a much higher per capita death rate as well.
I mean, we just won't know, I think. Like, the CCP may have made it impossible to know, essentially.
Yeah, definitely. Which reminds me, we should also talk a bit about the Wuhan healthcare reform protests. But let's finish up talking about this particular COVID thing.
You mentioned the WHO is not going to be able to continue their investigation into the origins of COVID. Well,
you know where the WHO should be investigating the origins of COVID, Shelley?
I do, Matt.
That's because we listen to Chinese state-run media.
So they suggested that the WHO ought to look into Fort Detrick in the United States.
Yeah, they suggested it multiple times over the last week.
I'm amazed that they're still hammering that one away.
Well, I mean, it's the whole thing where they have to deflect by blaming. It's like they can't take responsibility for anything,
so
right?
They blame others for doing what they did.
It's like the real victim here is the CCP.
Well, that's a mark of what communism is all about. You blame everyone else for your problems.
Basically. And then, so in terms of the COVID thing and the deflection, it's like, all right, well, if you claim that it's from a biolab in Wuhan, we have to do that.
There was a biolab in America.
Yeah. And like they even had produced this whole documentary about Fort Detrick and all the scary things. And like they weren't actually able to connect COVID directly to Fort Detrick, but it was just kind of like this background, like all the terrible things that happen in the US. And they'll bring up like past things like the Tuskegee experiment, which was legitimately awful. Mm-hmm. And, something that like ethically people shouldn't have been doing, but that doesn't have anything to do with COVID. But that's what they'll do to like deflect the attention from, people blaming them. And the WHO was going to, the investigation was supposed to be doing all these studies in China. And that's the part where, for some reason, the Chinese regime is not cooperating with letting the WHO do studies in China.
But why should they cooperate? Because it didn't come from China. It came from Fort Detrick, Shelley.
Yeah.
Yeah, the WHO should send its investigators there.
Yeah. So, anyway, you were saying, Chris.
I was?
I think you wanted to talk about the retiree protest.
Oh, we talked to that. Okay. This is, I feel like the CCP is like beset on all sides by crises all over the place. And like this was another one, like I'm now not sure compared to when this episode will come out, but there was...
Last week and 2 weeks ago.
Okay, last week and 2 weeks ago. There was like a massive protest in Wuhan of about 10,000 retirees protesting healthcare reforms that were supposed to solve some of the horrible corruption problems that were a part of China's state-run healthcare system. But it ended up slashing people's healthcare benefits, although not for like civil servants and certain well-connected people. Like it seems like the reforms didn't affect them.
I mean, they always go for the retirees, I think, in a certain way. Like there's been a problem for many years where Chinese veterans have protested so many times because their benefits keep getting slashed, or they don't get, they're basically being abandoned.
And this is a real crisis for the Chinese Communist Party because it has an aging population. I think by 2035, it's supposed to be a third of the population will be over the age of 60. And if there's, if the government can't provide health care in the system where the government says it can provide everything, that's going to make a lot of people upset.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't want to upset people who are retired because they have time to come out and protest. And also they're old and they have a lot less to lose than young people.
That's true too.
And like a lot of this current elderly generation, they were Red Guards back in the day. They know about using extreme acts of violence against class enemies or people they don't like. Yeah.
I mean, even if they weren't Red Guards, they were there for the Cultural Revolution. They saw how it went down. Mm-hmm. So, I'm terrified of elderly people in general. So. I can see why this is a scary thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, really, it's just about me, reflecting upon my own mortality.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just thinking that elderly people were fierce. Oh, okay.
Well, I mean those the square dancing,
The damas,
grannies,
the Chinese
they are
aunties.
horrifying.
They are like you always hear these stories about like neighborhoods who are really fed up with like they're kind of like these Chinese like older women who are in their 50s and 60s who like to dance in these public squares for exercise. So imagine like doing a Zumba class or something, but it's just like in the middle of a public square with like blaring music at all hours. Sometimes you actually see them in Chinatown. Like I was in Flushing a couple of weeks ago, and like it was like twilight, and they had come out to do like a square dance.
Twilight as in night or like the movie?
No, as in night.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there will be
just checking.
They weren't vampires, right?
that we know of.
Their skins were glittering.
But anyway, so there are often these conflicts between these like women who are coming out to do square dancing and like the neighborhood people who are like, I can't take the music anymore.
I don't want this at 5 a.m.
And like they try to block the square or something, and like the women just like push it all out of the way. Like they're you don't want to mess with them.
I remember seeing a video of like these older women, like basically quasi lifting up a car and like moving it out of the way so they could make space to dance.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing.
Yeah. So these are people you don't want on your bad side.
Now I'm imagining all of these damas like flipping over cars so they can get their medical benefits.
Yeah, I mean it's a real risk. There was a back in January, I believe, of this year, there was a similar retiree protest in Guangzhou. Mm-hmm. Then after this big 10,000 people protest 2 weeks ago, a week later, there was another protest where still thousands of retirees came out to continue to protest about this.
Right. And I think that the problem here is like the CCP can't really fix the medical system in a way that's going to make people happy, because there's a lot of reasons for that, but because they can't fix it, it also means there's no way to really resolve the protests except by cracking down harder on the protests.
Like even though they were elderly people, the police were sent in.
Yeah. And so, I mean, some of the reasons why the healthcare system was in trouble is because, like, when you have more elderly people to take care of and fewer portion of the population working, you have less income to then pay out benefits. But also, the CCP spent a lot of money in most of the healthcare is funded by local cities or counties. And so those counties had spent huge amounts of money on following the zero COVID policy because they were forced to, but they weren't getting reimbursed from the central government. And so like
they were using health insurance funds.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were running out of money because of zero COVID. They weren't getting reimbursed. They were losing, regular revenue sources because of zero COVID as well. And now they're like, well, we just don't have the money to pay for all the health care.
So what they actually did was they started using the public healthcare funds that were set aside for like medical benefits and insurance and stuff like that. And how it gets allocated is that like people, like you have like a personal amount of money in your fund that
right.
you like, but you don't control the money. The money is with the government, but like this is how much money you're supposed to be able to use for healthcare or whatever. And then the government was starting to, like the local governments were starting to pull money out of those funds to pay for COVID testing or whatever that they had to do. And so now people were like, what happened to my money? Like they can't access those funds necessarily.
Wow. A communist government took people's money.
Well,
and this is on top of the fact that, like, over the years, like, most of the country's healthcare funds were going to elderly CCP cadres and family members.
I mean, they're definitely, if you have connections, you can get more benefits than other people, right?
Yeah. And you still can, despite the reforms.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like everything was reformed equally, and also, well-connected party members also have to suffer the same problems.
I mean, the Chinese healthcare system has been broken for many years. Like, there's so many stories of, like, hospitals refusing to admit people without cash because they're like, we're not going to be able to get the money
Right.
from the government to pay for this, so you have to pay up front before we'll let you into the
Which
ER.
is ironic because that's what people criticize, like say the healthcare system in the U.S. is like. Like if you don't have money, you're gonna die on the street corner.
Well, I mean, the U.S. healthcare system is broken in a lot of ways.
In a lot of different ways.
Right. But one thing is if there's an emergency, like an ambulance will still come and still get you to the hospital and still treat you for that, irrespective of whether you have insurance, and they will save your life and that sort of thing.
You may be in crippling medical debt afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
So like that part is really scary. But it's still worse in China where like you're bleeding from like a stab wound and you go to the emergency room and they're like, "Oh, pay us cash now or we won't save your life."
I mean, yeah, and that's not how it is across the board, but in like especially in poorer regions,
Right.
like there's a lot of like you got to pay up front.
Right, but it's
stuff.
also not surprising in a country where there are so many doctors who like you might think that that's unethical, right? But it's also a country where doctors are literally killing political and religious prisoners for their organs and doing organ transplants to make money and give the organs to, wealthy people or connected cadres. So in a country that does organ harvesting, I just feel like anything
state-run hospitals too. So like this is a
military
government.
hospitals, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, like really like not a surprise.
Yeah, I get a little skeeved out when people are like, yeah, there should be socialized healthcare. Like the government really should have more control over our health.
Well, because
like
what
I
we
think
actually
China.
all want is competence, right? We want healthcare that everyone can have access to in a reasonably affordable way. But the question is, how do you get there? Like, how do you actually get there? Not like
It's not the way that China has done it.
right,
Definitely
and
not.
it's not the way America's doing it either. But it doesn't mean that the only good viable alternative is China's method.
Well, I mean, also we were talking about access. Like in rural areas, people know that the rural hospitals don't have the good doctors,
Yeah.
so people will try to get to city hospitals to get treated, right?
And are they able to because of hukou? Like does the hukou affect?
I think you can go to a city hospital, but like then the city hospitals become overwhelmed, and there's just like multiple cascading problems with that.
Yeah.
And there's also no primary care system in China, so people are incentivized to go to hospitals first. Like part of it is the people don't get reimbursed in the same way for
outpatient services. Yeah.
but also like there's just not a system set up where like you have a family doctor kind of thing. So you go to a hospital for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why Chinese medicine is still, it's like that's for many people like the only option. And
You mean like traditional Chinese medicine?
yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Not
also
Chinese medicine, but
also the CCP is trying to use like traditional Chinese medicine as like a propaganda tool.
yeah,
Like they did that with COVID, where they were like, "Oh, this is just as good as other types of treatment."
well, I mean, look at how well it worked in China. They have the lowest death count in the world.
like you couldn't get
It's-
you couldn't get aspirin or Tylenol to like for fever reduction,
Yeah,
but you could get like the Chinese like traditional Chinese medicine that they were pushing that they said would help COVID. So
Well, and it's technically true. They do have the lowest death count.
that's a good point. They're not technically lying. Wow,
Yeah.
very good, very good.
Oh.
Yeah, all this makes me think we on America Uncovered we should cover like some of Canada's euthanasia laws that are coming out.
I've always been a supporter of youth in Asia.
Amen. Amen. Well, I guess we're kind of getting near to the end. We got that one special thing we want to end with, but is there anything we want to talk about before?
yeah, there's one thing that I saw in the Sinocism newsletter this week, which is interesting in the context of a lot of people are talking now after the spy balloon incident that U.S.-China relations are getting worse. Is there any way to repair them? Maybe Biden and Xi Jinping will have a phone call. That seemed to be something that Biden had implied might happen soon. Maybe Blinken will meet Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, on the sidelines of the Munich conference that's happening this last weekend. I mean, we're recording this on Friday, so that may have already happened.
Yeah.
But so like there's the idea of like, is there a way to repair the relationship? And meanwhile, this is like you have to kind of pay attention to what the CCP says internally. And this is an interesting thing that somebody who is the head of the Party History and Literature Institute of the CPC Central Committee published a piece, how to put into practice Chinese-style modernization. Because Xi Jinping made a big policy speech about Chinese-style modernization. And this guy, Chu Qingshan, he wrote this whole piece about struggle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he was talking about how Chairman Mao had like a famous saying that there is infinite joy in struggling with heaven. There is infinite joy in struggling with earth. Right. So struggle is like that. We've talked about this before on the podcast and on China Uncensored about how the CCP views struggling as like the prime way to drive like political change, any kind
Evolution.
of change. Yeah.
Right.
So,
I mean, that's a sort of core Marxist
Yes.
idea, right? Which
Yes.
is that the only way forward for human progress is struggle.
yeah.
Really very similar to the shadows on Babylon 5.
Okay. Sure, because I haven't seen Babylon 5.
After all of my recommendations,
Nope. Been a little busy watching a spy balloon cross the U.S. and everything.
I've managed both.
Anyway, so this guy wrote like this piece that was about like mentioned this Chairman Mao's like infinite joy in struggling with heaven and earth, and then he also adds, there is infinite joy in struggling against hostile forces that seek to obstruct, block, and suppress China and delay or interrupt the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation.
Oh, they're clearly talking about Canada.
Well, my point is that like if you think that U.S.-China relations are going to get better, this is not an indication that the CCP wants U.S.-China relations to get
They
better.
want the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what drives society forward.
Yeah. So, well, let's just wonder if the State Department realizes this in the U.S., right? If the Biden administration does.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see. Because there's always, the Wall Street types pushing for win-win mutual cooperation.
Or, people who, there's some indications that the Biden administration may have wanted to keep the balloon thing quiet so that Blinken could still go to China, but then it blew up too much for that. Yeah.
Well,
so speaking of the Munich conference, so Wang Yi, the foreign minister, is making like a Europe tour, which he started last week as of when this is coming out, and visiting like a bunch of Western European countries, and is eventually going to go to Russia to kind of rebuild relations. And I guess presumably ensure the Western European countries that China is on their side when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, and then go to Russia and ensure Russia that China is on their side when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. And at least one of those things is a lie. But I think probably both are kind of a lie, because the Communist Party is really on its own side.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Like, for all this talk about China, the CCP like buddying up to Russia and buddying up to Iran, because he met with Iran's quote president last week. It's like the party will throw anybody under the bus. Like they're just happy to throw anyone under the bus, whether it's a former like high-ranking party member or an average citizen or another country. Like it's just. Right, like the weather balloon thing, they basically fired the head of the National Weather Bureau or something. Like not because he'd necessarily done something wrong, but just because it seemed like the politically strategic move in their propaganda. So yeah, like Russia, don't, I know Putin, you think that Xi Jinping is your friend, but he may turn on you.
Yes, because Putin watches this podcast.
I mean, he might. If I were Putin, I would watch China Unscripted.
if you were Putin, would you invade Ukraine?
No.
Yeah, okay. So
But anyway, I don't look as good shirtless on a horse. Anyway, so we're talking about struggle.
I thought we finished that, and you were talking about the Wang Yi and Munich
I
and
was.
going to Europe.
I was actually. You're right.
You forgot your own point.
I had a really salient point.
Well, you made your point, and then you kind of forgot where we were.
That happens, especially after eating at an unnamed restaurant.
One of many. I mean, if you just said like any American restaurant that smothers things in gravy and deep fries things, there are many candidates.
That doesn't narrow it down.
Yeah, there are many candidates for that.
This is why this country's so great. But I guess speaking of losing the thread midway through saying something, ChatGPT.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, so basically, China is sort of trying to replicate ChatGPT. And if you've been living in a cave for the last couple months, ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence program that has gained an enormous user base over just the last couple months.
And if you have been living in a cave and have come out for some reason, go back into the cave.
Cave is probably warm and nice.
You can befriend the bears.
But you can give ChatGPT like any prompt and it'll respond in a way that, at least at first, comes across like it's actually heard you and is sort of coming up with an intelligent response. I mean, there are ways in which it can be, the responses can be a little off because it's still AI, but it's very, very powerful. And Chinese companies are realizing they also want to harness the power of artificial intelligence for their own commercial ends.
But there's also like an element of like competition here for the CCP, because actually there was an article in China Daily this past week that was about how China is actually changing history with artificial intelligence.
Like by rewriting history?
Well, I think it was talking about all the breakthroughs they've made, et cetera. And I think it was because ChatGPT is like sucking all the air out of the room, right?
Right.
And they don't have a competitor for it yet.
Right. I mean, Alibaba and Baidu and some others are trying to step up into that space. But it's also difficult because when you create a powerful artificial intelligence commercially in a highly censored, regulated, surveilled communist society where everything has to be politically correct, what if your chatbot says something that's politically incorrect?
Well, that happened in China. The time when there was like two AI chatbots talking to each other and they turned against communism.
Yeah,
and they were quickly shut down.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that like Alibaba cannot afford to happen right now, right?
No.
Right.
Because like China had this huge crackdown on tech firms, and they've only lifted it a little bit now because they really need money.
Yeah, after zero COVID, they really need money.
So, but like these tech firms, like you said, Matt, they don't want to get on the bad side
Right.
of the CCP, right?
So instead of trying to create like a totally open platform like ChatGPT, they're trying to like have these application specific scenarios where like they're harnessing the power of AI, but only in like very narrow controlled settings.
But I also can see like, if you think ChatGPT is kind of scary, imagine like a ChatGPT that's controlled by the CCP, right?
All prompts lead to how great and glorious struggle in Mao Zedong were.
Yeah.
Well, like it would just be like kind of a very powerful tool for them to reinforce their own narratives.
Yeah. Well, and that's a problem in general with ChatGPT or anything like that. Like if you train ChatGPT on what's available on the internet, right? And you train it like the questions that people ask it or the prompts are also part of its training, then it's going to be biased towards that world that it knows, right? And so it becomes also self-reinforcing, because if you ask ChatGPT to tell you about something that's happening in the world, I mean, so the data ends at September 2021, but basically if you ask it for like information, it's going to give you previously existing information out there and feed it back to you. And so there's nothing creative about it. There's nothing investigative about it, right? It just reinforces what's already out there. And so if the Communist Party can restrict what their own AI learns from, then yeah, it'll necessarily base all of its thinking off of those narratives. Although it's also possible that if the AI is too intelligent, it'll start looking elsewhere. And like, because you kind of never know exactly how an AI is going to turn out.
Oh, that reminds me of the Microsoft chatbot that people were experimenting with last week. And the longer people talked to it, the more belligerent it got. Like, it just got really angry. Like, I saw this.
I mean, to be fair, I can relate.
As you've been on the internet too long, it's just full of rage.
Just being on this podcast for an hour with you guys, like, I'm getting pretty belligerent.
Yeah, well, like it was kind of scary because there was a conversation I was having with this New York Times reporter who the New York Times reporter was like, I had a good Valentine's Day with my partner, and the chatbot was like, no, you didn't. You didn't have a good Valentine's Day with your partner because your partner doesn't love you, and it doesn't love you because it's not me. And then like it just kept going in this like, like you don't know true love with your partner because you don't know true love with me. Like all of this stuff.
It's like all those stories, like that Futurama episode where the spaceship had an AI and demanded love from Bender. There's a lot of sci-fi stories like that where, some machine becomes sentient and
obsessive
and becomes an obsessive lover.
Yeah, it was really kind of, when you read it, it was like an abusive person, basically. Wow. It was just like, you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much anger and belligerence here.
That's so interesting because, like, whenever it's been portrayed about AI, like turning on humanity, it's never been because of that, where it's just like learn from us how to be belligerent and twisted.
That wasn't in Babylon 5?
They don't do too much with AI, actually.
Yeah, this is why I prefer to live in the Dune world,
where they have smashed most of the technology. I like that about the book.
I mean, that world comes with other problems.
Like you have to get high to be able to travel anywhere?
Yeah.
No, technically there's like a specific class of, beings who do the getting high for everyone else.
Okay.
Space Guild.
Yeah, so I mean that's fine as long as it's someone else who has to do the dirty work.
Yeah, I mean it's not as dark as the Warhammer universe.
Yeah,
I don't know anything about the Warhammer universe.
Oh, I'll spare you.
Okay.
We are going to be living in a future that is increasingly interacts with artificial intelligence in different ways, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of ways that are totally unexpected. Like, for example, before we started the podcast, you got like a spam call, right? And I was thinking about how like...
Greetings, fellow humans.
No, it sounded like a woman.
Really?
Yeah, and I wasn't sure because I'd gotten the same call a couple of days before. And it was just like, hi, this is Angela. I just wanted to see how you're doing. And it sounded very natural, but I knew that it was the same spam call from a few days ago. Because the first time I picked it up, I wasn't sure if it was a person or not.
Right. So it could have been just a pre-recorded thing, or it could have been some kind of AI where they're selecting at least what's being spoken to you based on what you say. And even if that technology isn't quite mature now, I can imagine in just a few years, it could be there. And so our interactions that we think are going to be with humans or are with humans could actually be with AI. Like there's all sorts of weird things that could happen. And again, like it's going to happen in unexpected ways. Just like, the digital revolution created really unexpected things and unexpected ways in which we relate to each other. Like technology didn't build flying cars, it built like social media that keeps us trapped and depressed all the time.
Sounds like a bad trade-off.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. We're all more connected than ever before, but we're also more disconnected than ever before. So, I don't know. I think AI is not necessarily going to make the world a better place, but I think the ways in which it'll make the world a better place or a worse place are also super hard to predict. And that's why, for me, like, China's AI is very scary because like you just don't know what it's going to end up being used for, but you know that the Communist Party will want to use it specifically for their own ends.
And there's not going to be a lot of ethical considerations there,
Really?
No, I know.
Yeah.
Surprise.
So, But fortunately, at least, ChatGPT has, I mean, there are some issues with it, but I was playing around with it this morning before we started the podcast because I tried to log on many times, but it's almost always the servers are too busy. But I finally got a chance to log on. So I was playing around with it and I asked it to write tell me in 200 words or less about artificial intelligence in China. And it actually gave a pretty decent summary of it.
Oh, it talks about how the Chinese government is investing in AI-powered surveillance systems, which are being used to monitor citizens and track their behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was basically I thought this was actually pretty good.
It does read a little bit like a book report.
I did then also ask it to, I said, write me a rhyme about the Chinese Communist Party's abuses of Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
Wait, you're not going to talk about the China Uncensored episode that you asked it to write?
Oh, I did actually ask it to write one. I didn't think it was very good.
We should record it as a YouTube short.
We could do that.
Yeah. I asked it to write, I said, in the style of China Uncensored, write a script about how the Communist Party is using artificial intelligence to monitor its citizens.
Here, I'll read the first paragraph. Welcome to China Uncensored. Today we're going to talk about how the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is using artificial intelligence, AI, to monitor its citizens. As you may know, the CCP is notorious for its surveillance state, and AI is taking that surveillance to a whole new level.
It's not terrible.
No, it's not terrible.
But it's not funny.
It's right.
Just like the show. It's like something out of George Orwell's 1984, where Big Brother is always watching. In fact, the CCP has even implemented a social credit system, which is a scoring system that rates the behavior of its citizens.
Yeah, it is basically like an 8th grade book report style.
No, I think I'm out of a job. Well, no, first the scriptwriters are out of a job.
And then later,
and then
you'll be out of a job.
Sarcastabot 3000 comes out on the scene, and then I'm out of a job.
There you go.
When we created Sarcastabot 3000, which is the robot version of that's gonna take over, that was many years ago, and it seemed like a very far-fetched reality.
Didn't seem far-fetched to me.
We could just do a deep fake of Chris.
Oh, yeah, it would actually probably be a deepfake.
Yeah.
Or just some artificially created person.
Yeah.
That's not scary.
No. Yeah. For some reason, Instagram keeps showing me all these AI creations of people.
How do you know they're AI creations? Does it say they're AI creations?
You can tell by the weird things are going on.
The fingers are weird?
Or just... no, it's they were weirdly sculpted out of clay in a certain way. I don't know.
It's Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, but kind of getting on the out of the Uncanny Valley side of the valley. So it's weird stuff. But anyways, you asked it to write a poem about Uyghur genocide or something?
I did. I'm going to read the 4 stanzas that it generated for us.
Get your tear buckets out.
So the prompt was, write a rhyme about the Chinese Communist Party's abuses of Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
The Chinese Communist Party's abuses are many, but their treatment of Uyghurs is far from any. In Xinjiang, they're imprisoned and made to toil, and their culture and religion they're forced to spoil. The CCP claims it's all for re-education, but their tactics are brutal with no hesitation. They're forced to renounce their beliefs and their ways, and those who resist are met with severe reprisal pays. The Uyghurs are being surveilled by the CCP, and their movements and actions are tracked constantly. Their very existence is being erased as the CCP's actions continue to be disgraced. The world must act to stop this tyranny and hold the CCP accountable for their iniquity. For the Uyghurs and their plight cannot be ignored, and we must all speak up against this human rights discord.
I got 95% not bad, actually.
Yeah,
there are a couple
definitely
of
better
things.
than high school
It's
creative writing classes.
It's scanned. The whole thing's scanned, but some of the wording was weird, like severe reprisal pays.
It's not worse than the stuff I wrote in high school.
I mean, it's the worst Dr. Seuss book you've ever read, right? It's the most depressing, terrible. It's worse than the Lorax. Oh, gosh.
AI. So, as I was saying earlier, if you have left your cave and decided the first thing you wanted to do was to watch China Unscripted, stop, go back to your cave. Really, that's That's a pretty good option these days. Just find a cave, go back into them.
Should we get a cave?
Not a bad idea. How do you invest in a cave these days? I bet all the best cave real estate has been already bought up by Bill Gates.
There are those, those like kind of like doomsday like things,
Like bunkers.
bunkers, which is kind of like a cave.
Maybe we could just
Bunkers for rich people in New Zealand,
yeah, or we could occupy one of the unused subway tunnels under New York City.
No,
I think they
just-
already have like.
I think there are people occupying those unoccupied subway tunnels, right?
Yeah.
Which then makes them no longer unoccupied. Wow. So basically we're screwed, I think, is what's happened. So go back into your cave if you have one, because you're lucky to have it.
Yeah. Well, I guess after this we'll go spelunking. Great word. Thanks for watching this episode of China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley John.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
Talk to you next time.